Turning points change the course of our lives, whether it's a big decision, overcoming an obstacle or tragedy, or taking a leap of faith. These stories of inspiration and resilience are what Turning Point is all about. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Turning Point. I'm your host, Priya Sam, and today you're going to hear an interview that was recorded on IG Live on April 25th. My guest was mental health advocate Mamta Chail. Mamta and I are both Fanshawe College alumni, and we are so thrilled to have Fanshawe alumni as a sponsor of Turning Point this season. I'm so excited for our live event this evening. Just going to give everyone a few minutes to join here. Oh, we've already got a few people joining. I'm keeping you in suspense a little about my guest this evening. Ah, there she is. Hello, Mamta.
Hello, Priya.
We've got a lot of people joining here. Oh, so nice to see so many people joining. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I've been looking forward to this interview. Mamta and I actually did a little pre-interview just over a month ago, and she really gave me a lot to think about. So I'm really excited for all of you to hear her story. All right, I'm giving everyone, we've got Steve's joining here. We've got Wendy. Hi, Wendy. Thanks for joining. Awesome. Okay. You know what? We got lots of people here, so let's get going. So welcome everyone to this IG Live. This is a joint event with Turning Point, which is my podcast, and Fanshawe College alumni. I'm Priya Sam, the host of Turning Point, and I'm also a very proud Fanshawe alum, and I'm thrilled to be joined today by mental health advocate and the president and CEO of Youthdale Treatment Centres, Mamta Chail, and she's also a Fanshawe alumni. Hi. Mamta, thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you, Priya, for having me. I'm so thrilled to be here.
I'm so glad to have you. I'm glad we're doing this because you have such an incredible story, and the advocacy work you're doing in mental health is something that we can all learn something from. So really excited to dive in. I got to know you a little bit better on our pre-interview, but I would love for everyone joining us to hear more of your background. So let's go back in time. Your family immigrated to Canada when you were just 11 years old. So what do you remember about that experience?
Yeah. No, and you hit it on the head, 11, right? So let me set this up for you, Priya. I was 11, it was 1988. I still remember July 16th. I was not a child anymore, but I wasn't a teen either. So it was really a pivotal time for me. And you know, at that time, I remember feeling really, really conflicted. I just watched my parents sell all their valuables, say goodbye to their closest friends, sell my bed. And here I was standing with my small suitcase, because that's all my parents gave me, with my entire life in it. And I think the confliction came from the promise that my parents were making, right? Like, you know, you coming to Canada, it's an opportunity for you and your sister and brother to get closer to your roots, get connected with extended family. My grandfather lived here, my cousins, my aunts, uncles. So there was that excitement as well. And as we came to Canada, we didn't land in a metropolitan city like Vancouver or Toronto. We landed in Stratford, Ontario. And I think at the time, rural Stratford, Ontario, the population was 27,000 maybe. I truly don't believe it was on the map, Priya, until Justin Bieber put it on the map. So a shout out to Justin Bieber for putting Stratford on the map. I do remember it being a really, really hard time. I remember praying just to go back, right? I wanted to go back for life to be easy again. As an 11-year-old, you know, I vividly actually remember my first day of school. You know, there's some things that you'll never forget. And I remember laying my clothes out the night before, putting my backpack together, getting up really early, making sure my hair was perfect. And I even put a little bit of makeup on. I stole my mom's makeup, put some makeup on, and I got the courage to walk into school, and it was Juliet Public School. And I remember as I was walking up and down the halls, you know, I was making eye contact with people, just smiling. And I realized then people didn't even know I existed. And why would they? Why would they, right? They didn't know who I was. And then I got the courage to go into my homeroom class. And I remember that's when I really froze. That's when it really hit me, that feeling of not belonging. I looked around my classroom and nothing was familiar. People weren't familiar. I didn't know them. The language wasn't familiar. I still hadn't learned the English vocabulary. I didn't look like anyone in Stratford, Ontario at that time. And so I remember, I don't think I ran, but it felt like I was running. Ran to the washroom. I sat on the stall and I just started sobbing. And I remember going home that night and just begging, like, full stop, let's go back, let's go back. My parents don't listen. We're still here many years later in Canada. But I think after trying and realizing we weren't going back, I learned the skill that many immigrants learn, and that's the skill to fit in. And so I learned to fit in, not only to survive, but to be able to be successful. And I hung on to what my parents said because we were taught that parents know best, right? And that was that one day Canada was going to be my land of opportunity.
Wow, I mean, you really painted such a vivid picture for us of, I clearly you still remember what that experience was like. I wonder, as the time progressed, I know there was kind of always this promise that it would feel like home. Was there a moment where you started to feel like, okay, this is where I'm supposed to be?
Yeah, I think over the years,
Hmm.
definitely, and there were certain things that contributed to that, but it took time. Definitely took a lot of time to get there, and I think, in a sense, you almost force yourself, right, to make sure that you do feel certain connections. So over time, absolutely, and I can proudly say, at the age of 47, I do for the most part.
Yeah. Yeah, but that makes sense. And I think anyone joining us who's had a similar experience, I think they can, identify with what you're saying. So let's fast forward a little bit because you finish elementary and high school, and then you end up at Fanshawe College in the Law and Security Administration program. So how did your experience at Fanshawe impact your career trajectory?
Yeah, no, such an important question because Fanshawe definitely was such a huge catalyst, Priya, for me in my career. I entered Fanshawe when I was 18, and like most 18-year-old people, I didn't know what I wanted to do, didn't know where I wanted to go, how to do it. I remember having a real interest in the human mind, the brain, though, and I'd started to get some passion for the social justice system. So I kind of knew some of my interests. Law and Order had kind of just launched, and I loved Law and Order. And so when I was picking my course, I was like, you know what? I'd like to be the next detective Michael Logan, right? He makes some impact, saves some lives. He does some good in the world. And so I signed myself up for law and security. What I quickly realized at Fanshawe, though, was that real policing wasn't as glorious as it was on television. And likely, I probably wouldn't be a good fit in the real policing world. But I continued on in the law and security. I finished my diploma. And throughout that journey, what I really learned, Priya, was that I wanted to know more, wanted to learn more, that knowledge really is power. And what I knew then, as I was going through the law and security program, was that this would be my first step in my continuous education journey. And it was. I went on to do my undergrad degree at Western, did a number of postgraduate certifications, and then got my MBA. And I truly, Priya, believe that if it wasn't for Fanshawe, I wouldn't have the confidence to continue in my education and really have that impact and influence I have today.
I remember you talking about the confidence piece in our pre-interview, and I think it's something, we can see when we look back, but we don't realize at the time how important that piece of just believing in yourself is when it comes to thinking about your future and what you can do.
Absolutely. And I think, we term that as self-efficacy in our world, but absolutely believing in yourself is huge. It doesn't matter who outside of yourself is saying that you can do it. I think that internal piece is so important. And that's what Fanshawe gave me, Priya.
Well, that's incredible. I mean, aside from a great education, what a gift to get from that time at Fanshawe. So you mentioned that after you continued your education, you went to university, and then you started working with children with mental health challenges. So how did you know that this was the work that you wanted to focus on?
Well, you know what, Priya? Actually, I didn't. I didn't initially know. I remember my best friend said to me, Mamta, let's sign up for this job, working in a group home, working with children and young people. And I was like, yeah, sign me up. I initially, Priya, thought this is going to be like a sign in, sign out type of job. And initially, for the first maybe day or two, it was. However, I quickly got to know the stories of these children I was working with, and how they'd been robbed of their childhood, the trauma that they had endured, the despair that they were facing. And it shook me to my core. It really did. And I was so young in my career. And I remember I was like, I'm going to inspire these kids. I'm going to be their inspiration. But what ended up happening, Priya, is they inspired my entire career. They really ignited my passion for social justice and my passion to help those who at the time can't help themselves.
Wow. Oh my, like that's so powerful. And also it sounds like very unexpected. Like this wasn't something you were going into looking for that.
Absolutely. It's fascinating when you think back and you kind of put all of those pieces together, how things just came to be, right? And here I am. And but yeah, definitely was not intentional. It wasn't, you're probably seeing the themes of Mamta had a lot of I don't knows.
Yeah, well, what an incredible way though to find your passion. And I'll foreshadow a little what's to come, but obviously that's the work that you continue to do today. I want to go next to your biggest life turning point, and this happens when you're 27 years old and you give birth to your daughter. So tell us about your postpartum experience.
Yeah. First of all, thank you so much, Priya, for asking this question. I really do think it's an important question, and we don't talk about it enough. I will share, though, that, in the last 21 years, we've definitely seen some gain in reducing stigma around postpartum. However, I think we have a long ways to go, and I think these types of stories are really important in being able to reduce the stigma. And when I think about my postpartum experience, I really think about the expectation we put on ourselves, Priya, and on others. And I think about the expectation I put on myself, and probably because of society's expectations. And that was that, childbirth was supposed to be some glorious, like beautiful, just miraculous, event. It was going to be the most validating experience for me. And, for some, that is really their truth. I think about pregnancy and how when a woman is pregnant, we focus so much on the pregnancy to ensure the baby is healthy. And then that woman gives birth and the focus shifts completely to that child, that baby. And we shift focus from the mother. And I feel like that was my experience for sure. There was a lot of focus on my pregnancy, and everybody around me was so excited when the baby came. And though I don't think it was intentional, the focus became about my daughter Sophia. I know that there are many cultures that have, stigma around postpartum mental health challenges, depression, anxiety, and I can't speak to those, but I can definitely speak to the stigma around the South Asian culture, Priya. And I think there's such a big elephant in the room when it comes to talking about childbirth and the experience after. And you're bombarded with, you must be so overjoyed, look at this beautiful baby, you must be on top of the world. And that was what was happening for me. I had so many people around me, family and friends, and yet I was feeling so incredibly isolated and alone. And I just wanted an outlet, to feel somewhat validated in some of my feelings. And so when I would get the courage to even start those conversations, I would be shut down because people didn't want to hear that, especially at that time. They wanted to hear about my beautiful baby and, the joy. And so in that experience, it just continued to get worse and layered, and fear and shame and guilt, all of those feelings kind of layered on top of each other, Priya. And I remember, after a few months, I still remember sitting on my couch. My then husband had left for work. I was in my pajamas. I was looking at my daughter who was in a swing, and I just didn't even have the energy to go and pick her out of the swing. And I remember just picking up the phone. At that time, I just succumbed to where I was at. And I called my mom and dad and I said, can you please pick me up? And they picked me up. They picked my daughter and I up. And, I stayed there for some time. And I still remember, throughout my suffering, I still remember sitting on the couch and my mom spoon feeding me. I remember this instance when she was spoon feeding me vanilla yogurt because I couldn't even feed myself. And I remember I couldn't even swallow it because it felt like I had a tennis ball in my throat. I remember looking at my daughter feeling like such a failure, Priya. It was a failure to my then husband, my parents, but most of all, my daughter. Like, how could I have failed her? How could I have turned what should have been the most miraculous experience into an experience where I just wanted to run away? But, I think about that today, and I think how ludicrous it is that we put these expectations on women. And we still do, right? That, everybody's pregnancy is so different. But for me, it was about 9 months of creating a child, a human being inside of me, organs moving all around. For me, I had a 16-hour labor. And then to deliver a child, and the expectation is that I should just be so elated, on top of the world, just feeling glorious. And I think about that, and why do we still have that expectation today?
I really appreciate your vulnerability because I think this is something that, and you mentioned, we've gotten better about talking about some of these experiences, but it's still something that is stigmatized, and that, there is the first assumption is that this is a kind of all beautiful and glorious experience. So I think your vulnerability and honesty is much appreciated there. I want to talk about some of the layers that existed because of, in, like you mentioned, in the South Asian community. Before we do that, I just want to say hello to everyone who's joined us in the last few minutes. Thank you all so much for joining. If you joined recently, I am Priya Sam. I'm speaking with Mamta Chail, and we both went to Fanshawe College, and tonight's live event is sponsored by Fanshawe alumni. So thank you all so much for joining us. In a competitive labor market, postgraduate studies can really help to set you apart. And Fanshawe College offers more than 50 programs to do just that in under 1 year. There are full-time and part-time options available, and many of the programs are even offered online. You'll leave with specialized skills from their career-focused curriculum, and many programs even offer credit toward industry designations. You don't have to wait until September either. There are January start dates for some of these postgraduate programs.
To find out more, visit fanshawec.ca/postgrad. Again, that's fanshawec.ca/postgrad. You can also click on the link in the show notes.
So, Mamta, you mentioned this period you're experiencing, postpartum anxiety. Your family is kind of helping you, but you're obviously experiencing some stigma in the South Asian community. And I know this is stigmatized, as you mentioned, in different communities. But can you tell us a little bit more about some of the experiences you had?
Yeah, no, for sure. And again, I do just want to say I know it is stigmatized in many cultures, and I'll speak about my own experience. And even within the South Asian community, people have many different experiences, just kind of speaking about my own. And, I, again, just deep in despair, so much pain, so much shame that I was feeling as well, and guilt, and felt so lonely and isolated. And I don't think that's uncommon for anyone suffering from any mental health condition or postpartum anxiety, depression, or mental health challenges, for sure. And what I wanted was connection. I wanted someone to be able to perhaps validate how I was feeling, to be able to say, hey, Mamta, I've gone through it, or I know someone who's gone through it and they've come out on the other side. I craved it, because that would help me get through the next hour, the next day, the next week, the next month. I was finding that I was just trying so hard to get a glimmer of hope, just some hope, to be able to carry me through. And at that point, there was a very small group of people who knew about it. And so I was trying to get that hope from them. And that was my then husband and my parents. I remember I was like a child almost, always constantly asking my parents, Mom, am I going to be okay? Please tell me I'm going to be okay, because the pain was so deep. And I remember, wanting my mom to come and say, Mamta, of course you're going to be okay. Let's get you some help. Let's get you to see if, doctor, let's get you some help. Let's get you connected to maybe your extended family, your community, so that you have a support system around you. And what I will say is, my parents had the best intentions, but they were also brought up as in the South Asian culture, and conditioned in a certain way, and had a number of different cultural beliefs themselves, and responded, I think, the only way they knew how at the time. And that was with, Mamta, I don't know why you're going through this. I've never heard of it. No one in our family has any mental health issues. Your dad's side doesn't have mental health issues. Actually, Mamta, in India, we don't hear about mental health issues. And, I remember my mom telling me the story of this one person she knew, one person in India who had mental health issues, and how they'd locked them up in an attic, and labeled them crazy. And I don't like that term, but I internalized that. I internalized that term. And I remember my mom kind of saying to me, Mamta, just go outside, just get some fresh air, stop thinking about it. Look at your daughter, you will be okay. Again, that's all she knew. And again, what I will say is that my parents had the best intentions, and it was later, where their love was, part of the reason that I recovered. But at that point, those comments just made me curl into a ball and layer, all of what I felt even more. And now I didn't even feel like I belonged. I didn't belong in a community, in the South Asian community, because how could I? I was too weak to belong in that community. South Asian people don't have mental health issues, and it must be about strength and weakness, because if they do, they just kind of brush it off, right? That's what I was told. And that's what I believed, Priya. And so that kind of, sense of belonging just really hurt, because I remember my parents wanted me to come to Canada to be connected to my roots, to that community, and now I no longer belong there.
Just so many layers to how challenging this situation would have been for you. And again, I just really appreciate, you opening up and sharing all of that. And this also really ignites your passion for equity. And I know this further increased when you had your son later on, and he was diagnosed with ADHD and a learning disability, which was another turning point. So you kind of have all of these personal experiences that you then take and translate into the work you're doing. So how did that impact the work that you started to do with advocacy for mental health for youth?
Yeah, yeah. It definitely ignited passion for sure, though not when I was in the depth of my kind of despair, because at that point, Priya, I don't think I could even put together a coherent thought. And I was happy if I dressed myself. But, as time went and I started slowly to recover and get some more hope and more kind of rational thinking and logical thinking, I definitely started to challenge some of my thinking. The thinking of, it's only me. I must be weak. It doesn't happen to South Asian people. I don't want to embarrass my parents. And all while I was hearing at the same time stories of how a young South Asian girl accidentally swallowed a bottle of pills, or a older South Asian man accidentally had his car stalled on the train tracks and died with a train hitting him. And though I don't know what the cause of death is, and in those situations that I heard, what I came to realize, Priya, is that South Asians don't have a gene that makes them immune to mental health challenges. I became really curious about that, and I started to do research. I started to do research around the South Asian population and mental health challenges. And what I found was fascinating. And the fascinating piece was that South Asian people who struggle with mental health don't actually get help until it is very acute, until it is a point of desperation for themselves or their families. So what does that mean? It means that when it's mild or moderate, they don't actually seek help. That when it is absolutely essential to get help, that is when they're seeking help. And so for a minute I asked why, but the answer is obvious, right? The answer was exactly the same answer that was there for me, and that was shame and stigma. I didn't seek help because of shame and stigma. Mm-hmm. And so that's when I really pre-avowed that I was going to share my story. I was going to help to reduce the stigma. I was going to, with the knowledge and experience I had, I was going to be a voice and, hopefully save lives. And that's what I started to do. I started to share my story. I think initially, even my parents were a bit apprehensive about that, but I started being really vocal about what I had endured. And it is absolutely incredible that when you start to share your story, how many people come to you. And the number of people who have reached out since I've shared my story, whether it's in private, anonymous, or people who are, courageous and just share, has been absolutely incredible. But I know, Priya, it is such a small, small sliver of the number of people who are suffering in the South Asian community in silence. And I think we all owe it to our people to really support the reduction in stigma, so that we can ease people's suffering for sure. So yeah. And circling back to kind of my son, the other part of it as well, when I think about after I had my postpartum anxiety, I was like, okay, you know what? God, universe has given me my share of mental health challenges. I'm done. That's it, right? He filled my plate, and now I'm done. I've done it. I think the universe just thought I had a bigger plate. My son is 16. He has a diagnosis of ADHD and a learning difference. And though ADHD is not categorized as mental health, it's actually categorized as neurodevelopmental. It's often, there's often interplays with that. And what I do want to just say with respect to ADHD in general is it presents differently for many people. So there isn't a cookie cutter approach, but the way it presented for my son was hyperactivity, emotional dysregulation, temper tantrums when he was younger. And because it's combined with that learning difference, he would had outbursts even in school. If he was asked to read out loud, he would rather be kicked out of class by throwing papers around than be embarrassed in front of his friends. And there was a time when my son's dad and I would just cringe every time the phone would ring, because it's like you have to pick your son up, or maybe he's suspended, or however. My son also has a lot of privilege, and we were able to pay privately for tutoring, pay privately for therapists. He had, any technology that he needed. In my work, I had people, I had connections. I knew the system. I could book off time to talk to the teachers, meet with the teachers, help teachers actually understand, because, that's the world that I work in. And my son is doing really good right now. They say C, skip diploma. So, hey, he's doing well at the age of 16. And what he's really kind of taught me is that he is doing well because of the privilege that he has. And, he is thriving because of the privilege that he has. And every child, whether they have the resources to technology, private tutoring, private psychotherapy, or whether their mom's a CEO of a mental health organization or not, they deserve thriving futures as well. And that's why I do the work I do.
Yes. And I know I definitely like, this is one of the things we talked about in our pre-interview. Like I just really appreciated, the acknowledgement of what he's been through and why he's able to be where he is, and then your continued passion to reach that mission of getting this access and this opportunity to these resources to every child. I want to touch quickly on one other thing that you mentioned, which is, about sharing your story and how this is kind of the first step in helping to reduce stigma. And this is something that myself and the Fanshawe alumni team really connected on when we were coming up for the vision for this series of interviews. We really wanted to focus on alumni who could share stories like the one you're sharing that others can learn from, and that will help to bring more understanding to different issues. And, today we really appreciate you sharing your personal story and also about the work that you're doing. And for anyone who's just joining us, hello, I'm Priya Sam, and I'm joined by Mamta Chail, who is a mental health advocate and also the president and CEO of Youthdale Treatment Centres. And we have just been talking about the reason that she does the work she does, which is a combination of her own personal experience and her early beginnings when she started working with children experiencing mental health challenges. Mamta and I are both Fanshawe alumni, and so pleased to have Fanshawe alumni sponsoring tonight's event. So, Mamta, let's pick back up at your work here, because I want to talk about where we are today, because we know COVID and the days of lockdowns were particularly hard on our young people. So, as someone who works directly with youth, what are the biggest challenges they're facing today when it comes to mental health?
Yeah. And so, again, thank you for asking the question. I don't think we're asking it enough now. I think we did ask that quite a bit during COVID, because people definitely saw the relationship between COVID and mental health, especially in children and youth. And, we've kind of weaned off of asking about it. But there's definitely still a crisis in child and youth mental health that we're seeing. And what I want to say is, we heard that, at times that COVID created a mental health crisis. And I would argue that for sure, Priya. There was a crisis in mental health, especially for children and youth prior to COVID. It definitely got amplified with COVID, and there was additional layers that people who had mental health challenges prior to COVID faced during COVID. And then, of course, people who may never have experienced mental health challenges were definitely also having mental health challenges during COVID. I think the piece that we're seeing is that we're seeing younger and younger kids with a higher acuity and complexity and severity of mental health needs. And what I mean by that is that you have young kids who have severe mental health needs, which often also is co-occurring with perhaps substance use, behavioral addictions, what we call like internet digital dependencies, technology, and we don't have the resources to support that. So the needs are getting higher, kids are getting younger, and the resources are continuously being depleted. I think the other piece is that kids don't live in a vacuum. They need the support of their family and caregivers. And COVID, unfortunately, did impact the mental health of many, including family members. And so now what we're seeing is entire family units who are really suffering with mental health challenges. I think probably the real crisis today is what I talked about, the increase in needs and demands, but also that we're seeing when we talk about resources, we're seeing mental health professionals leaving the sector, the child and youth mental health sector. They're burnt out. The wages aren't enough. And, with inflation and, we've had bills that have actually limited increases in wages. We don't have the professionals to adequately, with quality, provide treatment to these young people who have such complexity, acuity, and severity.
I mean, that I know it's such a loaded question to ask, because there are a lot of challenges. I think we hear about a lot of them, but it's almost like we don't hear enough about the solutions. And sometimes it seems like, we hear about funding, for example, and it sounds like a lot of money, but then we don't always hear about where this is going or where it's needed. But it sounds like from what you're saying, one of the biggest challenges is getting the right care providers. And then the second one is keeping up with the changing needs, because they are evolving as our world evolves, which now our world changes so quickly with technology and all of the environmental factors that are impacting this as well.
Absolutely. And I think, there's for sure, we talk a lot about funding, but I think, truthfully, when we think about what else needs to be done, for sure, funding is the one piece, but I also think it's about really looking at our entire system, Priya. I heard somebody say you can't break a broken system, and you can't fix a broken system with the same resources that broke it in the first place. And some will argue it was never a functioning system to begin with. It was built not to be functioning. So as I think about that, it's really an overhaul of the system. And I think we need to be bold and really ask our real experts, Priya, the people with living experience, our children, our young people, families, communities, what do they need? And I don't mean that in a performative, tick off the box, have them at the table. I really think we need to really understand what it is that their needs are, and then build a system that addresses those needs so that they can really have the outcomes that they deserve.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that makes it's interesting how often these answers are found in these sort of simple back to basic solutions. And I know it's not simple to do all the research and everything, but it seems like something that should be a natural part of making decisions and moving forward and reimagining this future. I know you're doing a lot of work when it comes to advocacy. So and another big question for you, but what are some of the specific changes that you would like to see and that you're working towards in your own personal work?
Yeah, I think one of the pieces is really that whole notion around stigma and really ensuring that people see mental health as health. Often, as we know, mental health is often invisible and as a result doesn't get the attention that it needs. I think the other piece is in that kind of reduction or trying to support stigma, it's allowing people to be vocal about their needs. And I say that, Priya, because of the fact that, whether it's vocal about your own needs or your family's needs, no one deserves to suffer in silence. But what we also know is if people are silent, it allows our decision makers and funders to be silent. And, that silence actually costs lives. So we need to be really vocal about our needs.
In your work and advocacy, you are, a voice for a lot of young people who maybe, don't obviously have access to decision makers. So how has the response to the work you're doing changed? I know this work to kind of reduce the stigma, it seems like there has been some reduction and that we're talking more about it, but of course there's so much more work to do. But I'm curious, you've been doing this for a number of years now. So have you seen a change in the response you're getting?
For sure. We definitely are, and it is positive. There is definitely more funding, as it relates to mental health and addictions. And I talk about that across the entire lifespan for sure. I think where there's a big and is that we were so behind already when the funding kind of started. So what we have to do is we have to really catch up. And to your earlier point, Priya, so much is changing. The landscape is constantly changing, and we can't fund a sector like it's still 1970s or 1980s. So I think we are slowly, getting there, but we need to really, we need to definitely have more resources and more fundings to be able to catch up.
Is part of that also offering different resources for different communities? I know we talked earlier about the South Asian community and other communities of color too that might have different needs or experiences when it comes to mental health.
Absolutely. It's, one of those pieces when we think about outcomes, it's about having culturally appropriate supports and services, having people who supporting you, who look like you, who actually understand. So definitely working towards that. Currently we do have a very Eurocentric, model of treatment and really ensuring that we embed culturally appropriate services definitely will have better outcomes.
Thank you so much for sharing that and giving us some insight into the work that you're doing now. I want to go back to your personal story here as we wrap things up, because I wonder, as you reflect back on that first turning point when you were 27, you're experiencing postpartum anxiety and really firsthand the stigma that exists around it. What would you say has been the biggest lesson that you learned from that experience to where you are today?
Oh, that's a difficult question, Priya. I think there's been so many lessons I've learned throughout that time. Perhaps the one is listen more and dig deeper. I think as even in 2024, there's still so much stigma around mental health. And really what I've come to realize is mental health doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter what culture, race, religion you are. and it is often invisible. If you would have seen me walking down the street in the depth of my postpartum anxiety, you likely wouldn't have known I was suffering, except for maybe my messy hair. But I think about, there's so many people who dress up, put on their makeup, go to dinner parties, and still want to die. I think about the notion, because I experienced it, is you can be surrounded by so many people, Priya, and yet feel so lonely and isolated. And as we talk about cultural stigma, mental health on its own is so difficult to unravel. Add the layers of shame and guilt and cultural stigma, and it's going to be so much more difficult to recover from. Why are we doing that to people? Why are we layering on to people? Why are we increasing people's suffering? Let's remove those layers where we can, so people can work on the core of their mental health issues. Lastly, I just want to give a big shout out to my mom and dad. As I said, their love was what helped me recover ultimately. And it was because they actually let go of the conditioning and some of the cultural biases that they were brought up with. They unlearned and learned. They dug deeper, and they were really able to listen more. And I go back to, Priya, what I learned in Fanshawe, and that is that knowledge is power. And what was added throughout this journey that I really came to realize was that knowledge is power because it helps to save lives.
What a powerful note for us to end on here. And I think that lesson that you just gave us about digging deeper and asking those questions, I think that's something we can all learn from and take with us, and not assume, like you said earlier, that, wow, this must be such an, exciting time in your life, to really give the other person the opportunity to say how they're feeling and to give them space for positive and challenging emotions, and to dig deeper instead of just the how are you, to ask those deeper questions and to really create those safe spaces for people to share their true feelings. I know I've learned so much from you, and I'm sure everyone joining us tonight has as well. So thank you so much, Mamta, for sharing your story.
Well, thank you, Priya, for having me. I'm thrilled to have been able to be part of this.
Yeah, it was such a pleasure to have you. And for anyone who joined us late, we will be releasing the full interview with Mamta as a Turning Point episode. So be sure to follow the show on YouTube or on your favorite podcast app. And I just want to give one more huge thank you. Oh, Tracy says thank you, ladies. Yes, thank you for joining us, Tracy. And thank you to all of you who joined. A huge thank you as well to Fanshawe alumni. They sponsored tonight's event, and they were telling me so many wonderful things about you, Mamta, and for me, it's just been such a pleasure to meet you, to hear your story, and to learn more about the work you're doing. So thank you so much again.
No, thank you, Priya.
Thanks so much, everyone. See you soon.
Thank you so much for joining us. And again, a huge thank you to Fanshawe College alumni for sponsoring this episode. If you're enjoying the show, please leave us a 5-star review. And I love hearing from you. You can find me on social media at Priya Sam, and you can also find out more about my coaching and keynote services at priyasam.com. Until next time, take good care of yourself and of each other.